Sorry for the interruption, it was just the video camera deciding that the battery was too tired and it wanted to go to sleep. I don't think anything of great note would have been lost. Here I'm working on the back of the mechanism plate itself. This is quite dirty. One of the things you'll strike when you're cleaning something like this, because the metal has an awful lot of holes and slots and things machined in it, inevitably there are sharp edges, and those sharp edges will catch the threads of cotton on the cotton bud, and they'll get left behind. If you're not scrupulous about removing them, they might jam something up. An alternative method here might be to use something like an ultrasonic cleaner. I'm not going to dismantle these levers in this case. They seem to move quite freely. I don't think there's a need for that. That looks pretty good. Once more over that, I think, and then I'll start working on the shutter blades. Right, these shutter blades, let's have a look at these. I'm just looking across these into the light from the window. You can judge a lot by the reflected light. Let's grab one of these where you can see it. When you got the light playing across it like that, you can judge the marks that are on the blade and get an idea of whether there's a problem with corrosion or some surface marking that you'd rather see the back of. That doesn't look awful. I'm just going to try cleaning those first with some naphtha, see how they clean up. I may or may not have to go to the trouble of polishing those with Brasso. We shall see. They're certainly not showing very obvious signs of corrosion, so I might be lucky. Of course, once they're on the mat, they're a bugger to pick up. The shutter blades are very thin. They're relatively easily damaged, so you do have to be cautious. So I'll get a toothpick to help me manipulate the blade, and I'll clean that surface. And here I can judge from the reflected light from the window, and I can see that even though I just cleaned that blade, the surface is quite marked. So I know that's going to have to be done with Brasso. Those marks aren't going to come away. And what they'll be I'm just running the cotton bud over it now, and you can feel surface roughness. This is not a bad example by any means, but you can tell as you wipe the cotton bud across it that the cotton bud has been caught at various top points by the roughness on those blades. So I'll have to clean those with some brass, so I better get ready. Now normally I just use an old t-shirt stretched over a piece of wood. It's my platform for cleaning the blades on, but here I've got a piece of very stiff foam plastic. I'm going to see if I can do these blades on using that as a platform, and I've got a cotton bud here soaked in brasso. I'm interested to see that if this will work for a couple of reasons. The first is it's much easier to get this on camera than my great big piece of wood and dirty old t-shirt leftovers. So I use another cotton bud to manipulate the blade and hold it down. I don't use tweezers. I don't even use a toothpick to do that job if I don't have to. You're applying more force when you're polishing a blade like this. I don't want to risk damaging anything. Let's have a look at that blade. Yeah, that looks okay. Let's move to another one. I'll just put some of the metal polish in the lid of the container for ease of access. One of the reasons it's important for the blades to be very smooth is that you're wanting them to run over each other at very high speed. So you don't want any excess friction. Using this piece of foam plastic here has an advantage, and it's at least a little bit soft and yielding, and I can get my tweezers in underneath the blade. If it was a rigid piece of plastic, I would have to try and slide the scalpel under there in order to pick the thing off, because it would just glue itself down to the surface. Now I should have 6 blades and I can only see 5. So one of two things has happened. Either one of them has not fallen off and hit the floor when I haven't been watching, or one of them is stuck right behind one of its mates, so it only looks like one piece when there's really two blades there. If I can't find a loose blade, that's exactly what will have happened. I did strike a shutter not all that long ago, certainly in the last 12 months or so, where there was an extra blade where there shouldn't have been one. And that was because two blades were stuck together, and whoever had serviced the camera hadn't noticed that. They'd put what they thought were 4 blades back into the shutter and then hunted round for their 5th blade in vain and got one from their spare parts bins. And it ended up with a double up at one spot. Right, so I've got 5 blades there, and somewhere is blade number 6. Let me have a look here, see if I can see any obvious problems. I'm just checking my apparent 5 blades to make sure that there's no double ups there. It doesn't appear to be, so the blade must be on the floor. Back shortly. The blade was on the floor. Fortunately, I hadn't trodden on it, put down the leg of the chair on it, or done anything else of a similar nature. That's good. I'm done with the metal polish. I'll tip that back in. That's what I'm using, Brasso. Let's polish these blades off and see what they look like. Oh yeah, that looks very good. Alright. Now, you can probably see from that one, from the reflected light, that that surface is fine. It's absolutely smooth and shiny, no lumps or bumps, no marks at all. I'll pop that to one side. All of these blades, after I've polished them off, I need to clean them with Naphtha again to remove any traces of the polish, because it's very likely that the polish has some waxy component to it to discourage future tarnishing, given that it's a polish for brass and copper. It's probably got some component that is intended to reduce corrosion. It's probably a wax, I would think. Be careful doing this, that you don't catch your cotton bud on the tail of the blade and pull it upwards, otherwise you will impart some bend to it It's quite a high carbon steel, I think, and once it takes a set, it would be very hard to encourage it to lie flat again afterwards. With diaphragm blades you can get away with a bit of distortion. It's not ideal, but generally speaking, particularly in any rangefinder camera, it's not going to cause you a serious issue. Shutter blades, by comparison, if they have any distortion to them, they're never ever going to run as smoothly and as freely as they should be. In this particular shutter, of course, the diaphragm blades forming the aperture are part of the lens, not part of the shutter body, just the same as they would be on a Retina Reflex S 3 or 4 or Retina 3S camera. Right, so there's my blades polished. Get rid of that stuff, and my handy block of plastic foam, which I'll keep for future occasions. Yeah, I'm just going to flip these blades over onto the other face of that tissue so I can clean the blades with naphtha now. And here I'm not applying as much force to the blades, so I'm quite happy to use a toothpick to manipulate the blades around. With this cleaning, all I'm wanting to do is remove any traces of the metal polish. And of course, cleaning them like this once again gives me a chance to inspect the blades. In fact, it pretty much forces me to inspect the blades, so I'm likely to spot any defect that I might otherwise overlook. And often you are left with defects, but some defects you can correct easily at this point, and you should correct them. Once the shutter's assembled, if you've got something you don't like the look of on a shutter blade, it's much more awkward to improve it. The sort of defects I'm probably considering there would be corrosion spots. If you've got a corrosion spot on there, it might be a hard lump. Sometimes you can scrape that off very successfully with the tip of a screwdriver. Well, you can do that when the blade is loose like this. Yeah, it's much more difficult if the blade was already assembled, and if it was on the edge of a blade you may not be able to do it at all, of course. Right, well, I've got my blades clean and I'm happy with the state of those, and I think that assembling the blade actuating ring into here would be the next thing to do, and then I'll see about rebuilding it. Okay, so first I've got to make sure that this is in the cocked position. It is. The spring here, the return spring for the little lever here, I'm going to make sure that's sitting in position, and drop my blade actuating ring in there. Going to go. It looks good. 3 screws hold this in place. Now there's lots of holes around there that they might fit, but you can tell by the marks on the mechanism plate where the screw heads were brought up tight against it, where those screws should be. I thought I had a bit of fluff on that, but it was just reflections and shadows fooling me. Check that those 3 screws are snug. Don't go mad doing anything up because you'll only end up breaking something or stripping a screw out. Checking that the spring is seated correctly here. Yeah, it looks right. It seemed to move smoothly enough. Let's move that back to the cocked position. Okay. Now, typically I want to lubricate the blade actuating ring with a bit of graphite powder, which I'll do at this stage. And basically there's a couple of little notches in here, and I'll just puff a bit of graphite powder or drop some graphite powder down in there, and then I'll just move the blade actuating ring backwards and forwards like this to work it in, and then blow it all away. With a camera like this, if you had loose particles of graphite powder floating around the shutter, it's not as much of a problem as it would be with a rangefinder camera, because the lens in its entirety sits on the front of the shutter. So, you know, if any graphite powder settled on the rear group of the lens, you could blow it away without any problem. Right, graphite powder.